Matias and I have been talking about how we were going to, what kind of fireside, by the way, no fire to be near at all here, very upsetting. We were talking about how we were going to have this conversation because historically, I've interviewed Matias about various topics, usually design, but we thought it would be interesting if we interviewed each other, and so we both have a set of cards today, and we're both going to be asking questions, and it could be a disaster, or it could be magical, or something in the middle. So, Matias, I think you wanted to lead.
I did. Thank you, Josh. Good morning again. We've been talking for about 10 years, I think, on and off, different products. And it's always been in the context of looking at the products that me or my team have been responsible for designing. And you and your team have been doing this kind of critique and reporting on, I think, products from a lot of people in the audience as well.
Yeah, tearing down. We've been tearing down and tearing apart your hard work for years and years.
Heartless, honest criticism.
Brutal.
But that was actually my first question is normally your stage is one where you're critiquing products, end results. What would you say to this audience if you have an opportunity to talk before they actually create a product?
Well, it depends on what kind of product you're talking about, but I will say, you know what I would say if I could talk to anybody before they create a product, particularly at companies that are large, at like Google-sized companies.
Oh, I see.
And I actually think Google does a pretty good job.
Just a few of those.
But not everybody does. What I would say is don't do focus groups. Don't listen to small groups of people that you bring into a room and ask them like specific questions about how you make a product. I would say make a product that you think is awesome and that you love and that the people that you know and care about and understand get how it works and like it and want to use it. Because I have seen so many companies do this thing where they go in, you'll go into a meeting with them and they show you this product and they say, we did testing, user testing, and we found that 9 times out of 10 users prefer this to this other thing. And it's like, your group is so weird and small, you put them in such an odd environment, and you can learn some things about how the general public might interact with something, but I think the best design, the best products, come from really smart people trying to solve their own problems, trying to solve problems that they really deeply understand. And so when you get to a situation where you're trying to solve somebody else's problems and you're using these very artificial environments to validate whether your solve has worked, I feel like it can often lead to disaster. So I would say, I guess what I'm saying is follow your heart when it comes to design. Does that make sense?
That's inspirational.
Is that what you're doing?
Follow your heart. That's good.
Do you find that you're doing that at Google? Are you following your heart? Or are you following a mandate from far beyond your...
Not a mandate. That's actually a good question, because it really resonates with me when you talk about not doing focus groups, not trying to decide what is the right course to pursue by kind of being unopinionated. I actually think design always should be opinionated. But it bothers me a little bit to think about design being limited to solving your own problems only. I mean, I almost think it's like easier to solve your own problems.
Really? Would people have as many problems as they do if they were easier to solve? I feel like my life would be way easier if I could solve my own problems.
Not in that way, right? What I mean is, one of the biggest challenges we have as designers is to pull ourselves and our own perspective out of the problems. Right, is to really understand somebody else's problems. And I don't think focus groups are a way to, understand whether you've successfully solved the other person's problem or not. Maybe it's one of, I actually dislike focus groups because I think of them mostly as a marketing tool. But there is all sorts of different types of research techniques that are about gaining an understanding of different people who are different than you,
right?
And kind of putting yourself in their point of view. We had dinner last night, and somebody was railing against empathy as an overused buzzword. So I think we're going to have the empathy, shot drinking game.
Yeah.
Whenever that word gets used.
Well, we do have these drinks. So
we do. Okay.
Yeah, Matias and I thought it'd be great to have mimosas in the morning on stage.
Terrible or brilliant?
I don't know if it was a great idea, but they are quite delicious.
I don't think so. But as much as empathy might be abused.
Right, do we have to drink every time you say empathy? Is that the game?
Yeah, you keep drinking. Okay, I'm just going to keep saying it. As much as it might be abused or misused, I actually think that concept of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, of stepping out of your needs and your values, like that's really important. That's really critical.
Okay, I'm not saying don't think about other people. What I'm saying is
Yes,
I'm saying don't create an artificial environment where you think you're going to figure out what the problems of other people are. I think
Yeah.
maybe I can expand this and say, I'm saying solve problems that you see, that you understand. But I feel like when you put people in an environment where you're sort of artificially asking them to give you feedback, you don't end up with the right kind of feedback. I do think data is powerful.
Yeah.
I think using data in the right ways.
Behavioral data is powerful.
Right.
Asking people opinions is really, can be valuable, but fraught with danger, right? People are not very good observers of themselves. They're not very good judges of their own value. I think anybody who has kids knows this. What's the famous line where, if you asked 1 million people to design a car for you, they'd all have cup holders and mini fridges and, V8 engines and
American car. You're
seats.
talking about an American car. It would be the entire car would be cup holders. There's no seats. All right. So you disagree with my basic concept about my advice for designers. Okay. So we actually were talking about. I saw you in New York. We have a lot of like social engagements. I saw you in New York, and we were talking about UI design and sort of where everything is going. I mean, we've talked about this obviously throughout the years. And if you look across now the major platforms in mobile, Android, iOS, Windows Phone, yes, I'm throwing that in there. It is a platform that exists. But if you look across those platforms, and a lot of those platforms are starting to inform what we see on other screen sizes, right? I mean, if you look at the new OS 10, it's very much like mimicking what has happened in iOS. Obviously, across Google products, Chromebooks and Chrome and email and everything is sort of moving towards a unified place. But it's to me, and if you look at Windows Phone, it's actually sort of in a very similar space. It's this very flat, it's very clean, it's very spacious. And, I'm not saying that I want to have like skeuomorphic be a thing again, but I do feel like, have we lost a little bit are we past the moment where people are really excited about what you can do in those spaces? And are we in like the little valley between the peaks where we're going to just ride this sort of very familiar, very similar, because honestly, like, you could put an iOS device and something with material design in front of a random person who doesn't really know the platforms, and they may not be able to tell you that they're dramatically different platforms. I mean, Apple even has like a back motion now, you've got your back button, they've got their swipe. So are we in the valley of sameness right now in design?
So you're saying you're bored. As a technologist, you're bored.
I'm saying I miss felt and other surface. I miss wood textures. No, I'm saying that things are not as differentiated as they once were. I mean, I actually booted up a Palm device the other day because I'm a sick person, and a very sick person.
I saw that.
And yeah, Spotify still works, which is
yeah.
really insane. But so kudos to Spotify, by the way, for like really keeping legacy products going. But yeah, I mean, I looked at that and it felt very much like the early days of when we were figuring out. It was very there's some skeuomorphic stuff going on there. So I don't know, yeah, I feel like we're in a little bit of a down period. I mean, material design is beautiful. I'm contractually obligated to say that to you while on stage
right.
here.
I think you actually you have to say it 3 more times before you get off stage.
Perhaps the most beautiful mobile operating system that's ever been created. I have one more and I hit my quota. So, but tell me, what do you think? Am I crazy? Can you empathize what I'm saying?
Now you have to drink.
I think you have to drink.
I think it's true. There is a certain sense of fashion, I think, that starts to play into design that we see now. Actually, kind of it was always there. I'm almost tempted to say that there's a fashion in digital design that maybe is more pronounced now because some of the technology is more mature, some of the capabilities, in terms of resolution and rendering and animation, everything is more pronounced. And so that gives us kind of a greater expressive range. And with that greater expressive range, we now have a little bit of a sense of fashion. I think there's also an element of kind of fundamental needs and kind of convergent, common, successful solutions. It's kind of like the keyboard thing, right? You have the QWERTY keyboard, and like Dvorak keyboard is superior to it in terms of
you
theoretical
think
efficiency.
Do you personally feel that?
I haven't done the studies, but according to what I read, in terms of pure typing efficiency, it should be better. But it's this marginal improvement, and so it's okay. Everybody kind of sticks with the standard keyboard. Right now, you'd be insane to try to launch a product that has a keyboard concept, right? Like a display, whether it's virtual or physical, that has a keyboard layout that's not QWERTY.
Right.
Well, I see this all the time. Like I see a television will come out and it'll be like A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Yeah, that's actually very common on television.
I know, it's crazy.
But you couldn't put, is just a standard keyboard layout better on a television? Is that easier for us to parse when you're that abstracted from the surface?
I don't know that it's better. It's just, it's familiar enough that the familiarity kind of overwhelms the potential optimized benefits, right? We were talking about this before. There's always this tension between doing something new that's marginally better and the switching cost, right? And so I think there are periods of consolidation, if you will, or settling in terms of paradigms. I think of them more as plateaus. I don't know.
Really?
I like to be optimistic about
that is a very pessimistic view, isn't it?
Yeah.
I guess plateau also sounds bad to me.
Why?
Like you've reached, that's it. You flatlined up there.
It's a stable
How
place.
can you go beyond it? What are you going to do?
But that's the challenge, right?
Tell us
in
how you're
order
gonna
to
go
go beyond, I think you need to provide a lot more value.
Okay.
Right?
I get that. I think that makes sense.
So let me ask you a question,
Oh, boy.
right?
Yeah.
So now you're at Bloomberg.
Yes.
No longer a tech journalist, but that was kind of
I
model
dabble.
/ actor. Now
Yes.
you're just journalist.
I also model / actor. Don't forget about my side job.
That's true. But you were talking about some of the design challenges that you have there, right? So this seems like it's not just something you're observing in the world.
I actually have a card that I was going to ask you, which is, does print design make you a little angry?
I hear it makes you angry.
You know what? I mean, here's the thing. So before going to Bloomberg, I was at a startup, and we were all digital. There was no paper component anywhere. By the way, there's probably a lot of people in this room who are not going to feel this at all, because there are people sitting in this room who are like app developers, and they're working completely in a digital space, and they don't care about print at all. And I didn't care about print at all, really. I mean, I love reading magazines, but I never had to think.
So you went from neglect to downright anger.
I never had to think about it. But so I came to Bloomberg, and they have a publication called Business Week that I think is brilliant, one of the best paper magazines in the world. Like, I think it's incredible. And then I started sitting and I would watch the design teams design for print, and I started to formulate this. Of course I've always known this, but I started to think, God, this is so annoying. You have a set page size. There's one thing you can do with the page. You're going to look at it and then turn it over to the next page. And what a dream it must be to sit down every day and go, how can I make this fixed thing that I can do anything I want to in terms of design? How can I make this look good? And so I started to get a little bit angry as we were going through the process. We just launched a site called Bloomberg Politics, where we were going through this process of how do you bring the best of print, how do you make something feel really news design is actually difficult, and it's a real practice. And how do you bring traditional news design to the web? I think we moved the ball a little bit with The Verge, and then I'm trying to do some new things and take it somewhere new at Bloomberg, but it was really frustrating because you get to these places where you have this beautiful design and you're like, oh, wait a second. When it goes to a mobile phone, it looks bad. Or, oh, we forgot about the 3x2. Does everybody know what a 3x2 is? Raise your hand if you know what a 3x2 is. Really? Nobody?
Yeah, see?
One
Nobody
person,
knows.
two people.
What is this 3x2?
Okay, if you're doing design for the web in an ad-supported environment, there's an ad unit which is 300 by 250 pixels. It's on every website in the world. It sits usually in the right-hand corner. And as you start to design for the web, and particularly in news design, which is information dense, you realize that we're really just designing around. It must be wonderful for people who don't have to think about advertising. We're designing around the 3x2. That's basically the main anchor of design on the web if you're dealing with advertising. And it's totally insane. And it's been happening for like 20 years. And there's no way to stop because advertisers they don't move that quickly. They certainly don't move as quickly as people in this room. And so, anyhow, so it's just very frustrating when you look at what it's like to design for a very static place versus designing for now every breakpoint you can possibly imagine, every view type you can possibly dream of. So I got very frustrated. I got very mad at the print. I mean, I love the print designers, but I kind of shake my fist every time I walk past it. You don't have to worry about that, though. And you don't have to worry about ads. That's a whole other part of Google that has to worry about ads. All you have to do is make beautiful things. Now I'm getting angry at you. But is it,
we have lots of sizes to work with.
I'm actually curious.
Have some empathy for me.
Oh yeah, I have a lot of empathy. So I actually was talking to some of your Google buddies about the process for design. And so you're focused largely on Android. I mean, the design that you're doing touches all sorts of other things. But you're not the only person doing design at Google. I mean, there are other pieces of the company. Yes. There's Chrome.
It used to be that Google would only have one designer, but
one guy
past that.
They would just put stuff on his desk. But you've got a Chrome team, you've got an email team, you've got all these designers spread across lots of different products, lots of different breakpoints. So how at a company the size of Google, and one that has historically not been known, I mean, if we look back not that long ago at Google Design, I mean, we look at the things like Honeycomb. Somebody remember Honeycomb on Android? It looked like Tron. And, older Google products not that long ago. Google Reader, think about what it used to actually look like. Not known for design, how do you get everybody together and start collaborating on good design that is not just beautiful and useful, but that is aligned across all these different silos? Maybe they're not silos.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's any general lessons to be drawn from it, but just speaking from our experience, I mean, material design, kind of as a story, as a backstory, it's kind of like an insurgency. It was not a formal, top-down kind of process. It came at a certain point to take on that character, where we did take on a mantle of authority, which was necessary, I think, to drive as much change as we did. But initially, it really was kind of the design leaders in various groups who were all heads down, trying to make things better. And we just built relationships. And we'd sit around and we'd talk about, like, what are we going to do? And all of a sudden, this idea started to kind of trickle together. Like, well, what if, we kind of did this together? So it's
you form like
a cabal,
like a committee.
No, not a committee.
It's designed by committee. Is that how you would describe it?
No.
But what you described does sound kind of a little bit like a committee. You will agree.
I don't think so. It's a group of designers.
A cabal.
A cabal.
Okay.
I think all large design problems have to be tackled by groups, right? Typically, a lot of these groups have kind of a formal organization or formal authority. And we took on a formal authority at Google with material design later. But initially, it really was informal. It was a set of, no, I'm gonna wrap the flag around myself. I'm gonna say it was a set of design patriots who rallied together under a common vision and said, you know what, we're gonna risk it. We're gonna try to do this. And that's kind of how it happened.
So does that touch everything at Google now? I mean, will all products, does material design become a Bible at Google for how you do design?
It becomes a guideline.
Not a Bible.
Yeah, we're not big on
You don't
Bibles.
want to say that a committee produced a Bible, is that what you're telling me?
A committee did produce the Bible, actually.
Well, that's a rabbit hole we probably don't want to go down this early in the morning. But getting back to Google, you've got disparate teams, right? You've got people who've got to design a lot of different products for a lot of different places, but they have to work off of something. So you've got to get buy-in. Is it just collectively people buy in and say, of course we want this design? Don't you have dissent? Aren't there people who say, why is that button down there?
Oh, sure, yeah.
What do you do to them?
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Where do you put them?
Well, I mean, at a certain point, you have to make decisions, right? So we have a small team that is actually responsible for material design as a product, as a thing, as a guideline. This is no different than any other company, right? Like at a certain point, you reach a scale where somebody has to be responsible for the brand book, or somebody has to be responsible for the UI guidelines, somebody has to be responsible for a higher level structure.
Right.
And the teams have to work with that. And it's actually one of the things I think is really interesting about kind of creating guidelines and creating structures. There's a very fine balance between giving too little guidance and actually not helping people, and giving so much guidance that you become kind of a straitjacket. What I like to do...
Wait, give me a real-world example of both of those scenarios. I mean, that's very vague, but give me a specific example of what you're talking about.
Well, okay, take anything in the material design guidelines, the spec. I don't know if we actually use spec externally. We always called it the spec internally. So take anything. Take the fab, the big primary action button, right?
The thing that's in the right-hand corner?
The thing that can sit in the right-hand corner or really can sit anywhere on screen. And actually, the position is a perfect example of this, right? We recognized that there was a drive and desire to elevate the most important functions of an application. And in fact, there's kind of a design forcing function that's really positive that happens where you say, like, okay, you have an opportunity to say your application is about the content that you see on screen and one additional kind of meta concept, something that can't be visualized with content. And then when you do that, you get simpler interactions, you get simpler products, you get simpler designs. So let's create this design pattern that says, this is how you should do this. This is how things should look. We're going to take this one thing and we're going to elevate it literally on a higher surface, call it out with color, with shape, give you all these cues to say this is really important. So we had all sorts of examples of how to do this. And one of the things that we liked in the process of calling that out is that we like that it breaks across borders. So it either sits on top of content, or even more dramatically, it sits across a breakpoint of content, right? So it can sit where a card surface goes onto a background, and it can sit kind of half and half on that, or between a header and a lower piece of content, and it can sit kind of half and half on that. And the tension of breaking that line draws even more attention to the object, right? So it's all these like practical layout tricks that help elevate the user's focus to it. So then an app says, does this make sense for me? Does this make sense for my screen? I've got a product and there's no like primary meta thing that I want to elevate, like new or star or whatever it is. Do I need to do it, right? Does it make sense? And you can sit down and you can try to encapsulate a huge amount of guidance on all of the nuanced exceptions for why you might not want to do this, or why you might want to do it in a slightly unconventional position, or you might want to do it in a slightly different way. I don't think that's actually helpful. I think like the role of the guidelines is to provide the basic rules, to provide the basic structure. They're like teaching people about composition or about contrast. It doesn't mean that in your particular case, in your particular design problem, there isn't a reason to mess with that, to violate it, to play with it, right, to go in a different direction. But if you try to capture all that nuance in the rules, you end up actually not helping people who 99% of the time are just trying to be like, all right, I just need to get through this, right?
Do you worry that with that kind of, do you worry that we're simplifying too much in design? That things are becoming so simplistic that we're actually removing features that are useful? I mean, I feel like there's an idea that for something to be better, it has to be more simplistic and easier to understand at first blush. But we also know that some of the most powerful things require learning. Mm-hmm. You know, some of the most powerful tools that probably everybody in this room uses require you to learn the tool. And when you first see it, and when you first look at it, you don't know what everything does. And you don't know why it has certain functions. Do you worry that, I mean, I feel like as we move to smaller screens and to tablets and to phones, and those are our main points of interaction, that we are losing some complexity in what apps do, in what our tools do. I mean, does that worry you at all? Because material design it does kind of bury some complex actions, but it is very simplistic in presentation. So how much of your time is spent, you know, pulling out features and making things more simplistic? And should we all be very worried?
Well, again, I think what you want is a framework that allows you to have the conversation about how you could simplify. Right? Like when you first went to mobile, one of the biggest benefits of going to mobile was not any of the specific design patterns that came out of it, but simply the constraint of the screen is too damn small. You just cannot put all that stuff on it. So you have more variety of more focused tools instead of one large tool that has a lot of complexity where you only ever use like a small percentage of it, but you're burdened by all this complexity even though you only want to use a small part of it. That doesn't mean there isn't room for these larger, more powerful tools. Actually, you know, you're talking about, you're kind of bored with the way a lot of the tools and a lot of the interactions we have today are converging or perhaps reaching some kind of status quo. But I think there are still pretty interesting new opportunities that are totally untapped. And the way that simple tools work together, I think, is one of those, right? I think about like how we wrote these questions on these note cards, right? We did this with just a Sharpie and the note card, right? And the Sharpie and the note card is really powerful because you can draw just about anything on the note card. It's an incredibly powerful tool, but it's also really simple. All it does is it's going to create words or images. But one of the things that you do with a Sharpie or a note card, then you combine it with another tool. You're like, as designers, you've got Sharpies and note cards and push pins or sticker tape and a wall, and now you've got a totally different tool.
Now
Now
you're making a scrapbook.
you're making it a board, a wall, right? You can have a brainstorm with lots of ideas on
decorating a dorm room.
Right? So I think that's actually one of the places that that's a really open frontier, is how we get all of our more simple, more intuitive, more focused tools to work better together, to work in concert and to do things with them together in seamless ways that they couldn't do just by themselves. I think that's actually a much more natural way to build complexity.
And you're not talking about making products that work with Sharpies and note cards. You're talking about making products that are aware of each other and aware of environments.
Sure.
Am I correct in understanding that?
That can exchange capabilities and information with each other more fluidly. Right now, you have a lot of these very focused products, but except for a few very coarse interchanges like cut, copy, and paste or drag and drop, these products are very siloed. The capabilities that live in one product is very isolated. When an image is taken out of a photo editing app that has filters and it's embedded into another application, it loses all of the complex history and metadata that came with those filters. When a place is taken out of a Maps and it's put into an email or into a chat, it loses all the richness that came with the map application, right? But in the real world, the tools that we've built everything around us, everything physical around us, that doesn't happen, right? When you combine a hammer and a saw and a screwdriver and a piece of wood, they become larger than the sum of their parts.
So is this something that you're working on, something that Google's working on?
It's something I'd like us to work on.
Oh, so you're not working on it?
I'm passionate about it.
So would this be a collection of products that interact with one another, or would this be something that is suddenly software is much more aware of the rest of what the discrete pieces of software are doing within an environment?
I don't know.
I feel like you do know, and you're not telling me.
No, sorry. No, I think it's one of the unexplored frontiers.
Because what you said was very specific. That wasn't just like a random fantasy you just had about something you'd like to do. I'm not needling you for information. I'm just saying.
Yes, you are.
Well, I'm just saying you were very, some would say, hyper-specific about the kinds of interactions you're talking about. I mean, your phones, your tablets, your software doesn't currently do that.
No.
Although Google just did invent basically like short-term memory, right? Do you not want to talk about that?
Oh, yeah.
About AI?
The artificial intelligence that DeepMind has done.
Is that something that could be utilized in this
Maybe.
sort of? I mean, now I feel like I'm getting somewhere. Now I feel like we're really onto something.
Yeah, onto something.
Yeah.
The future of design.
The future. Well, I mean, design.
I was going to say that one of the interesting things to me is right now, I think design matters a huge amount in the creation of products and services. Because it's so easy to pour so much love and attention and craft into these hyper-focused experiences. And I think it's going to be a big challenge for designers and for the tools that we use to take that into a world where all of a sudden these tools have to start working with each other more fluidly. That's going to be a big change in how we think about things. And I think that there's a whole wave of these kinds of challenges to us that are coming. Right now, I see, kind of poking my head up, and I'm like, what do I worry about today in terms of how do we design something? And it's like everything has to move all of a sudden. It is just not okay to have anything be a static, non-responsive layout. Everything has to scale from different shapes and sizes. Every single transition and interaction and every piece of feedback, you just expect it to be crafted and carefully considered. And I'm like, oh my God. Where am I going to get all these motion designers, right?
Where are you?
I don't think there are enough of them, right?
You don't know?
I don't know. But that's like the challenge of today.
Right.
The thing that's also coming like right around the corner, which seems even more daunting, is we get all these motion designers, and it totally disrupts the way that our barely functioning practices are able to work. Like, we're barely able to deal with our ethnography and our research and the engineering development cycle and getting the layout and the visual design to happen in the right type of iteration and get feedback and all of that. We're stumbling, we're figuring it out. At least I feel that way. I don't know, maybe other people feel like they've got it figured out and they just go, but it feels like every product I do, every product my team does, it's so much room for improvement.
Right.
And then bam, here comes this additional need of motion. And where's the time going to come from that? Where is the understanding and the education from the other disciplines who are like, what do you mean? Why do I have to take this time? Why do I have to take this space? Why do I need room so that this part of my layout doesn't overlap each other so that the motion doesn't feel complicated, right? That's hugely disruptive. But then, when we start talking about our products and our designs not living in these kind of hermetic silos of just themselves, but having to actually sit up against others, actually dance together with others, right? That's going to change the way that we design. It's a different type of control. It's a different type of direction. We're no longer going to be orchestrating every single move and every single pixel. We're going to be doing something that maybe is, I don't know, more like jazz improvisation or DJing or something, where there's other actors that have their own agendas and their own needs in the design that we can't account for. We can't possibly predict what all these other apps, all these other services, all these other designs that are going to plug into my design are going to do. And yet somehow we have to have a flexibility in our designs to accommodate that. And that's coming. And then on top of that, and this I think gets to where maybe some kind of machine learning or more intelligent computing systems can help, is the fact that today, even with all of these meticulously crafted experiences that we have, where we say, you know what, we're not going to try to create the word processor for everybody. We're going to create the one that's for hipster coffee-drinking writers in New York who are journalists. And we're going to create the finger painting app
you have
for
weirdly
3-year-olds.
insulted me just now.
I was oddly specific.
Very
I don't know.
specific,
It just went there.
Yeah.
But we don't, even when we do that, even when our products are focused on a very specific target market, they're still very generic. We spend all of our time as designers prioritizing use cases and saying, you're not important enough. Your use case doesn't meet the 80% rule. Why do we have this thing in material design that says elevate this one action, right? It's all about finding this common pattern. But if you compare the diversity of software to the diversity of something like clothing, right? It's like orders of magnitude different. Right now, it feels like there's one jacket. It's like, are you wearing the journalist jacket?
I did. I actually bought this at the journalist
There's only
clothing
one
store.
jacket
That's
for
true.
journalists,
Yeah.
right? But in reality, people are incredibly diverse. They come from different cultures, they have different capabilities, they have different tolerance for information density, they have different visual acuity.
Yeah, but there's a hammer, and the hammer works really well. And then there's a nail gun, and the nail gun works better for certain situations.
If I go into the hardware store, there's probably 12 hammers.
Yeah, but that's just a question of how expensive a hammer do you want to buy? Which one seems most stylish to you?
And
I don't know, because I've never bought a hammer,
grips
obviously.
and balance. I don't know. This is theoretical. I never touch a hammer.
No, I get it. Clearly, neither one of us have ever gone into a store and bought a hammer, so that was a bad example. But what I'm saying is, a hammer is a hammer is a hammer. I mean, they basically all do the same thing. And then there's a nail gun.
But
and that's a very different thing, and for a different kind of user. But we've identified certain tools that just work really well across user sets. Mm-hmm. So I totally get what you're saying about personalization, which I think has been tried and failed in many instances. I know that I've had a lot of debates about, should people be able to personalize their news page? Do we want people to show me, I want to see this up here and this thing over here and never show me any of this? And what we found, not to go down a rabbit hole here, but what we found is that it's actually our job, to show people what's important, to tell them what's important. And so, and people feel overwhelmed by having to personalize and think about where things should live. So,
well, that's making
how do you make it not feel overwhelming?
Customer, that's kind of like going into the hardware store and being like, here's the tools for making a hammer. Figure out which one is right for you.
It's like
which is
Build-A-Bear,
different.
but for hammers.
Right, which is different than going
Startup
to a tailor.
idea, that's a freebie
Like
for
you
anybody
probably
here.
went to a tailor to get that jacket, right? You didn't
It's
design it.
possible. I mean, I did not design this jacket.
You went to some expert who was like, you're a journalist.
Yeah.
You're
And
this
you went,
tall.
You went,
you're
to,
gonna
some,
get this
you went
all...
to some expert, and they were like, you're a designer. Let me give you an extremely loud shirt.
No,
I want people, they're like, people need to know what's happening when you walk down the street. What's that guy do? Is he a carpenter? No.
No.
He's got that shirt
Not
on.
a
He's definitely a
journalist, that's for
designer.
sure.
Not a journalist. Clearly not a carpenter. But anyhow, you
Reeling
were talking
this back.
about my suit.
Yeah, I think there's many of these different axes that are going to be radically changing how we think about our design practice, that are going to be challenging like all the things that we think are the fixed points of what it is that we do as designers. Basically, in the exact same way I think that you were saying, like you were a print designer and you thought you knew how this worked. Print, I know how to make beautiful things. And all of a sudden when it's responsive, mind blown, right?
Yeah.
That's coming for every aspect of what we do.
Except print. And we actually were like sort of running out of time. So I think we have to wrap up. But before we do that, I have one question for you. I'm very interested to know your answer. What do you think is the most beautiful object that's either has ever been created or that exists now?
Oh my goodness.
So I had a bunch of rapid fire questions we're not going to get to. It's not an empirical thing, in your opinion.
I think those kinds of questions are like impossible to answer.
You're not going to answer?
Oh, no, I'm gonna caveat it very temporally. I was just in Kyoto last week, and I had this experience of going through the Inari temple there with the gates, the red gates all the way up the mountain. And that experience of being inside that space was one of the most beautiful experiences I've had. There was something that was just stunning about each of the gates was carefully considered and crafted, yet it was very organic and chaotic as well. Yet it created enough structure and rhythm. It was kind of like architecture and kind of like music and kind of like exercise too, because you're actually climbing up this ridiculously tall mountain and it keeps going, and you're still in this space. So that's what comes to mind.
That's a pretty good way to end it. Matias, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.